Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Great to have you with us on the program today. Remember, check us out on the website, thisweekinamerica.us, Facebook, facebook.com/This Week in America. As mentioned, Doyle Smith is our guest on the program, author of the new book, The Bible is a Single Book. Doyle is the son of a Southern Baptist minister. He had read the Bible through 5 times by the time he had left his teens, and after 50 years of meditation and thought, he had the insight that produced this book. A member of Mensa and other high IQ societies, he has an MA in education, been a CPA for 30 years, familiar with many church denominations, currently a member of St Marks Episcopal Church in Canton, Ohio. He is active in the men's prayer group, is a lay leader, a tenor in the choir. Doyle Smith, our guest on This Week in America, to talk about his book, The Bible is a Single Book. Doyle, welcome to the program. Pleasure to have you with us.
And thank you. I'm glad to be here myself.
It's a fascinating book, and I mentioned that you had the insight after some thought, and actually quite a bit of thought, to write the book. Talk about how this idea all came about and how you decided there was a book there, and then talk about the research process in putting this together.
Well, the process is that I have had the Bible behind me with the understanding of all of the different parts, but only when I spotted some coherent plot from the beginning of Genesis to the end of Revelation did I realize that the Bible is not a 66-book compilation, but is one coherent plot from the beginning to the end. One of the problems we have when we talk about the Bible is we look at each individual part as by itself as if it did not relate to the whole. We have several things about it that are hard to understand at first. We always talk about Adam eating the apple, but the words that are in the Bible are, he ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He chose on his own to decide that nakedness was evil. He realized that this was God's prerogative to make a decision as to whether something was right or wrong, and as a result, he lost his favor with God. God's not a very favorable to other people taking his job away from him. Now, anytime anyone does that, anytime anyone chooses to decide for himself what is right and what is wrong, he ends up having an opponent who thinks that it is the opposite of what he decides. And mankind has always ended up in fights and furor because each person decides what is his own. In fact, from Cain and Abel through Noah, the fact that there were so many discussions as to what was right and what was wrong led such a turmoil that God decided to get rid of all human nation. He figured that Noah and his family would be good, but immediately after that, his 2 sons decided the 3rd son was wrong, and the thing started all over. It's always been a problem since because people decide for themselves what is right and what is wrong.
Our guest on
Our
guest on This Week in America is H. Doyle Smith. The name of the book is The Bible is a Single Book. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. In the book, and the book is very simple to read. It lays it all out. It's not a long book. You can sit and read it and come away with a great insight, great knowledge. Chapter 3 in the book, you talk about that, the problem, and you say a central question the Bible asks, if we can't know what is right and what is wrong, how can we know what we should do next?
That is the central thought of the Bible. And if you open a Bible without a concordance or any additions, it will open up in the middle to Job, and almost always in opening it up, it ends up with the last 4 chapters of Job. During those chapters, God is very angry at Job, not because he has not been a good, faithful servant to God, but because he has presumed to decide who God is and tried to understand him. And of course, we have nothing with which we can work to understand God. Everything we know about has been created by God. And if that's the case, we have no information whatsoever, and for anyone to say who God is and try to define him is really saying that he is arrogant enough to believe that he can accomplish what cannot be done.
Is that where we get in? Yeah, is that where we get into trouble trying to define things? And you talk about we feel we have guidelines and we keep trying to develop those. Defining and developing, is that where we overcomplicate things and we get into trouble?
Well, one of the simplest things, one of the most important things you learn when you finally realize this in the Bible is that the Bible is extremely simple. We are going to be accepted, and what we do, as long as it's done for God, even through other people, whatever we do is going to be accepted. Now, that's as simple as you can get. And what we find is that people don't like to be simple. They always try to complicate things because it's rather boring to be simple. And this is what people find. If I want to do something more than just be with what I'm doing. The 3 points that we have here are that we cannot decide for ourselves what is right and wrong. We cannot define God. And if we do accept God's acceptance of us, we can operate without knowing those things. And that's the important understanding that this book is supposed to give.
And the end result of that, and you talk in the book, the Bible is a single book, that once people put this in perspective and fully understand it, a lot of the stress of living is eliminated. And you said that actually happened to you as well. Life was a lot simpler when you understood these basic concepts.
That's true. Now, I did have several encounters with God in which he took a special direct intervention in my life. And had I not accepted that intervention, and I would have been, in one case, I would have been dead. In another, I would have been, I would have been dead in either one of them, because it was up to me, it was up to God to carry me out of a situation that I didn't understand. Once I went through it, I looked back and I did understand it. But it was a very clear control that God had over me. And one time it actually went to the point that I heard his voice telling me to get off my high horse and start working for him and not for myself.
Well, in the book, you talk about one of the things you really need to do, and it's difficult, is forget the me and think of us. And you list that as one of the important messages of the Bible. Talk about that, forgetting about our situation and think of loving our neighbor. Think of what we can do to make the world a better place.
If we subordinate ourselves, although we must make sure that we continue to survive, but if we love our neighbor as we love ourselves, then we start doing those things for the neighbor that the neighbor needs to have. And in doing so, we can specialize our understanding, and by working together, we as a people can operate effectively as a group, instead of each person saying, I'm important, you aren't. If we say, I'm important and you are important too, then we're in a position to say, I can do for you what you need, and you can do for me what I need. And sometimes the things I can't do, someone else who can do it, and what I can do for them. And we end up both benefiting greatly from the idea that I'm not the only one here. I am part of the whole of the world.
How difficult?
The word us means that.
How difficult is it getting to the point where you accept yourself and you say, unfortunately, most people don't accept themselves as they are? Is that difficult to get to that point where, okay, I know who I am and I accept it. I'm okay with that?
It is difficult because typically as we are children, Our parents demand of us that we live up to some standard that they have set. Quite frequently, those standards aren't our standards. They're the standards of someone else. The most obvious situation in this is where you have an alcoholic. It is very difficult for him to accept the fact that he's an alcoholic. If you consider him an alcoholic, he's going to be angry at you. If he accepts the fact that he's an alcoholic, then you can do something about it. The parable of the prodigal son has several points in it that ought to be remembered well. He came to himself. Yes, he'd wasted his inheritance, and here he is feeding the pigs. He came to himself and said, "Here I am. What do I do next?" And that's exactly what every person needs to say to themselves. And the third thing that is in there is that consequences do not evaporate if we talk in terms of forgiveness. Forgiveness is the ability to start from where we are and go forward, forgetting all that's in the past. But that does not bring back the past. And this is something that the parable of often people fail to understand from the parable of the prodigal son.
Our guest on This Week in America is H. Doyle Smith. His book is called The Bible is a Single Book. It's very easy to read. It makes so much sense as you're reading that. And one of the chapters towards the end is God's solution to the question. And you say very basically, his expectation is simple. And you use an analogy of a train. It's not all that complicated once you understand.
That's the most important thing that we understand. If we simply say, let God take charge and use the opportunities that God has given us. If we're an auto mechanic and we like being auto mechanics, then we should be auto mechanics and not worry about theology, because it's important that you help the other person keep his car going, and you can do that. God has given you the opportunity. He's given you the way to do it. And if you accept that gift, if you accept the gift that God has created you as you are and where you are, and you can do for God through other people what God has made you capable of doing, that's simple. And one of the things is we always get distracted by things that don't matter.
Boy, that is so true. H. Doyle Smith, our guest on the program, the book, an excellent one. The Bible is a Single Book. In talking about that as well, you talk about some personal experiences and the role of faith, and you say that God has a way of providing. And you talked at one time in your life, at the end of the month, you'd have like $15 left in the bank account, and that didn't bother you because God basically provided everything that you really needed. You were content with that.
Well, I was content with that because I understood that I didn't have to spend money if I didn't need to. And because I could accept the fact that I had what I needed, I had no worries about how much money was involved. I had one case where my daughter needed a $1,300 set of braces. And lo and behold, a client of mine paid his bill for $1,380. These types of things that happen to you because you, in faith, allow them to happen are things that you can't expect, you can't explain. They just happen.
The concept we talk about is very simple. You talk about that the world sometimes we are unwilling to look at things in a simple way. It's a completely different point of view for many people in studying the Bible. When you talked about the concept of this book, when you talk to people and you talk to a number of people, a number of denominations, what is their response to what you're talking about?
One of the parables that's in the Bible has to do with a group of people who were healing in Christ's name that didn't belong to the group that Christ had around him personally. Christ's comment to that was, "He who is not against me is for me." I have never run into a denomination that did not at least partly make life better because they tried to do what God wanted them to do. Maybe they failed, Maybe they weren't perfect, but they did do something for the world that would not have been there if they had not tried. I do not know of a denomination that I have been involved with that I would find unwilling, that I would be unwilling to deal with the people in it.
One of the chapters in the book deals with the issue, and it's certainly a current one. It's in front of the Supreme Court right now: separation of church and state. Talk about that. I don't oversimplify again that concept because this has evolved over years, but talk about that concept.
Well, I've been involved in politics most of my life, and one of the things I have found is that for a government to work effectively, it cannot be a ruler of the people. It must enable the people to rule themselves. For that purpose, then, the government must back off from trying to set too many rules and regulations. Paul gave the statement that the purpose of the sword is to punish wrongdoers. Punishment is only good if it prevents future wrongdoing. So that is one of the objects that the state can do. The second one is to make a judgment and solve disputes so that people can get past their disputes. And the third is what we can do together, what we each cannot do separately. If you attempt to go beyond this, you are stepping on a serious problem as a government. Now, Christ said, "Be ye perfect, even as our Father in heaven is perfect." And every Christian is trying to do so. Well, if you are trying to be perfect, you don't go murdering. So you go beyond what the law calls for. Wrongdoing is best defined by the Ten Commandments with the understanding that they are principles and not religious statements. Wrongdoing is what destroys human beings or societies. And it is not up to the church to ask for the state to take over its job and consider it wrongdoing. For example, an abortion. I know of many cases where it was necessary that abortion can come through, but God, in His wisdom, knew what the mother was involved with, knew what the doctor could do, and if the legislature comes between the doctor, the woman, and the Lord, then it is getting out of its field. It's important to understand that government is very limited to preventing wrongdoing, to resolving disputes, and to doing together what we cannot do separately. If you go beyond this, the government is unable to do its job right, and the church, if it tries to meddle in that area, is failing to live up to its requirements of asking for perfection and forgiving those who don't quite make it.
We've got about a minute left in the program. It's gone by way too quickly. Let's talk about the role of tolerance. And we've seen this with the new Pope, who's talking about sort of refocusing, loving your neighbor, taking care of the poor, that type of thing. We see battles that sort of have as a platform religion with intolerance from time to time. How important is tolerance? Looking at the other person, understanding, and treating them with some love and respect.
It is essential. Too many people fail to understand the difference between a tropical and a temperate culture. In the tropics, there's no winter. We have heard of Aesop's fable about the grasshopper and the ant. The ant studied and stored everything for the winter, and he succeeded in surviving while the grasshopper died during the winter. But when you look at it and say, there is no winter, then suddenly the grasshopper is the one who is important. And once you recognize that your culture does not cover all situations, you're in position to start living and looking at other people in a more favorable light.
Excellent way to end the program. Our guest on the show has been H. Doyle Smith. His new book is called The Bible is a Single Book. Information on that available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Doyle, an excellent program. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. I think we all learned something today. Thank you for being with us.
And thank you.
You're listening to This Week in America.